Hi everybody, Kelly Sussis here with Philosophy Society. We're at Toronto Metropolitan University. We have new people in the room, people online and on YouTube later. Sometimes people are like joining the thing, so I just like, it'll be like a little bit. Oh, that's fine. There'll be like a little bit of a noise where I have to like click it. Okay, I'm gonna try the blue marker first. So I like this one. It's good. Sometimes the markers don't go. Okay, so the Philosophy Society. So generally speaking, I'm going to start this way. We talk about epistemology, which is the branch of philosophy that studies knowledge. What is knowledge, right? There's one stream of knowledge that's like facts, okay? And the way that philosophers have discussed this since Plato is something called the true justified belief kind of system. And like conceptually, philosophers will agree on that, and then they find problems with it, right? Over many years of discussing it. So we have the true justified belief. So for it to be knowledge, it has to be something that's true or false. There has to be a believer, someone that believes in the thing, and that believer would have to justify it. This is why it is true, right? And then there's this other kind of knowledge that's like, so the first one is knowing what. And then there's knowing how, which is like a practice or a demonstration. Okay? So like a carpenter that builds a house may not be able to really justify why it is the case that they're not an engineer per se, but they went through a practice many times and they've been successful over time, right? And so knowing what and knowing how are two different types of knowledge. One is semantic, it's linguistic, it's how my language fits together. And then the other one is like me in reality or me in the world, how I'm interacting with reality. And so the Philosophy Society, so university predominantly, or the academy, has been focused predominantly on knowing what. Philosophically and in its endeavor towards knowledge in general, right? And so the Philosophy Society is actually more focused on this knowing how part. That's really the goal. Even though this rendition of it, like the Philosophy Society that I do on a weekly basis, it's just a lot of me talking about stuff. But the point is I'm talking about things that you can go on your own, and it's directed towards specific thing, living a good life or eudaimonia, right, or well-being. And it's about like me discussing the knowing how for that. So it's not the philosophy of art per se, but it's like, what is it to live a good life? And what are all the components of that? So that if you listen to me online or you come here and we talk about stuff, you can go and live your life better, right? And achieve higher well-being. That's kind of the goal. And so when I say philosophy, I'm more talking about this part. And this part is necessarily incorporated regardless. It's just that it's not, in university, you're going to go through like 13 weeks for a course, and you're going to have specific journal articles or a textbook that you read about what philosophers said before, and then you're going to like write an essay, right, or do an exam. This is not really that same kind of a thing. It's not to substitute that. I think those things are important. It's more to complement it. So I still think it's important to study in university and learn some of these things, like ancient Greek philosophy or critical thinking. But the things we talk about here and the society part, so it's not philosophy class, it's more of a social group component, okay? So when we have people, and this is the introduction. When we have people, right, in some kind of a group format, when we talk about wisdom, so philosophy is the love of wisdom, and we break apart wisdom, we can define wisdom in some ways as the soundness of our experience, decisions, actions, and judgments, for example, right? And so to have sound, like a sound judgment or an experience, would be to not make certain errors or decisions. So if I know that, for example, it's unwise to run with your shoelaces untied, this doesn't make sense, right? You know that when you're a kid, you're like, don't do that. And so that's like the wisdom of having shoes. So when we have the wisdom of a social group there's certain biases that humans have in social groups. And to be a wise social group, a philosophy society, or a wise group would be to not make those mistakes. And so you say, well, what is that, right? So one thing is like the biases or errors of social groups. And we want to like avoid this. Or in some ways, the structure of the group itself, or the orientation, kind of the way that it's structured prevents that from more likely being the case, right? And so you say, well, how do you do that? Well, all groups are oriented in some ways by goals or values, right? So if you're in the workplace, like you're a computer scientist, right? You're with a bunch of other computer scientists. They give you a project, and the only reason you're really there is because you're A, getting paid, and B, that you're going to do this project, right? Sometimes we're in the workplace and we're like, I don't like this person. Why am I here with you? Because this is my job. You know what I mean? And so this kind of a group, there's all groups have goals and values, and then there are practices within that group. There's things that they do, right? And I draw it this way because there's the ways that the individuals relate to each other. Now, there's certain social norms that we have in different cultures, like in Canada or wherever else around the world. And there are limitations to that based on just being human. Like we don't have telepathy, for example. You know, it's just not part of what we are. If it was AI, it would be a different context. You know, like an embodied being is something that's distinct to humans, whereas AI, it may not be that case. It might be like a network, you know, and there are no embodiedness. There's no distinctness between consciousnesses within some network of AIs, one big like blob of whatever, you know, intelligence. Part of these biases comes from, in some ways, what these goals and values may be, and the relation between the members of these people. One, for example, is like groupthink. Another one is like conformity. Another one we could talk about is like, or confirmation bias specifically. Well, they're different things. Right? Some will be more individual and more group oriented, right? Like the bystander effect. And so, and the list goes on. So on the website, I've listed like 150 biases. And then I give like an action plan on how through some kind of a group, we can mitigate those biases, right? Like having brakes on a car. You know, if we're going to accelerate, what means we have to decelerate. If humans have a natural tendency to be biased, yeah.
Well, I was about to say, like, this is about how groups can make individuals better, right? But there's also this thing where the theory is that groups can make individuals worse, where people would do stuff in a group that they wouldn't do individually.
Very good. Yeah. So like that one thing would be like in the Holocaust,
yeah,
right? An individual. So one of the other things, conformity and obedience. So Milgram did experiments, I don't know if you guys know about this, where he got participants to shock somebody, apparently until the person died, as a study to see how the presence of an authority figure would make somebody go to the point where they basically killed somebody, right? And this study came out of an interest to understand why certain individuals that didn't appear to be evil or malicious would do such horrible things in World War II, right? Or in other areas of the world, you know? And so, yes, so groups is like a force of nature. So one of the most recent things I wrote on their website, oh, yeah, to admit somebody. I identified 2 axioms. One is basically just consciousness. And 2 is sociability, which is basically to say that like there are group forces and there's individual forces, right? And the force of the individual is that you have your own conscious experience and your independence and identity, right, of whoever you are as a person. Like, it's like my perspective is like, we're all human, but like I'm looking over here, right? You guys can't see the exact perspective. And if I was colorblind, my perception of the walls in the room may be different than your perception of the walls in the room, right? And then the sociability force or axiom is just that social groups have like a huge influence on our conscious perception and kind of who we are at the end of the day. So knowing that, when we talk about a philosophy society, again, when we go back over here with the university, there's like the history of philosophy. And we can talk about like Confucius, right? Like Asian philosophy. And then there's like ancient Greek, there's like Plato and Aristotle. And they say a bunch of stuff. And I can have a bunch of slides and go through all those things, right? But this is more about, it's more like what I'm doing here is more of like a think tank and a Socratic, which goes back to the ancient Greek tradition in some ways of being Socratic, to kind of say like, what is going on here, right? And then we're going to also draw, like what I do is I draw like this little funny tower. I don't know if you guys see me do this online. The Wizard's Tower of Philosophy, or the Ivory Tower. Talk about that in university, right? And the higher you climb the tower, the more devoid you are from all the other people down here, right? So, and that's kind of what a PhD is. You're very, very specialized in a field, and less and less people know really what you're talking about. And so that's good in some ways. It's good to develop our knowledge and to understand what we're doing. But part of the problem I see with the world and with people, so on one end of some kind of spectrum is we have mental health, and then on the other side we have like government, okay? And the negative part of this is like a dictatorship. I'm making certain assumptions when I say that dictatorships are bad. Some people might disagree with me, like the dictators, for example. Don't take my power away, right? And then mental health / well-being. And on this spectrum, like I said, the consciousness mental health thing is in you, and the social group or government is the group. Is there some like common denominator that can kind of deal with both of them? And that's where I think that this would be the solution to that. This is the intro to the whole thing, right? This is why I think it's important to practice, right? At least once a week. Like, what are we talking about? And then when you go, how do you look at things a little differently? And how can you interact with society and yourself in a way that it increases your well-being and it makes a better society, right? Now, if you look at like a cult, like, is this a cult? So no. Why? Because I'm trying to teach you to integrate with yourself more, to not appeal to authority, for you to be your own authority, right? Whereas a cult would have like a leader and they would say, bow to me. So we don't want to do that. And then the other thing is cults take people away from society, right? In their own little group. Whereas I'm saying we need to integrate together. We need to, one of the biases is in-group, out-group bias, which is the seed of racism and prejudice and stereotyping, right? And so if we can look at each other as a meta group, that we're all human, right? Then we can see past superficial properties or whatever the hell it is, right? And that's important, you know, because whether it's religion or ethnicity or gender or sex, if it's leading to us not having a healthy functioning society, then it's a problem, right? Our way of integrating, the way we relate to each other. Now, I'm not saying we should enable people's psychosis. If someone is confused, I think it's important for us to, that's where the philosophical part comes in and the critical thinking, right? What is real? And what do we use to figure out what is real? You know what I mean? Psychosis is the inability to distinguish reality from non-reality. Like if I believe that there was like an ice cream maker over there, and I literally just went over there and started making an ice cream and like I was eating it. And I was like, this is so good. You guys like the blue one? It's great. And you're like, what the hell are you talking about? This is crazy, right? You would think I'm crazy because it's not real, right? So what is real? So this is our job. And science as a tool, as like a measuring stick to kind of see how far something is a way that we test our judgments, which goes back to like a wisdom thing, right? The quality and soundness of our ability to make judgments. That's why science has survived, you know, at least so far, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, so if we have science, and over here we have religion, they are very different, right? Religion is based on dogma and in some ways indoctrination, which is believing without questioning, right? And this very often has led to problems in the way people relate to each other. Science has also led to problems too. For example, there was like testing on individuals, like in the early 1900s, or like there was that Dow Jones, there was like this company that like tested chemicals on people and shit. Not cool, right? We need to have ethics. Or even like the Stanford prison experiment, like putting people in like a situation and then they get into conflict with each other and they're basically almost torturing each other. Not good, right?
So like on the issue of the spectrum here, so I guess are we just simply reducing religion here, just I guess a childish mythology and I guess the epitome of I guess human tyranny and all the terrible things that you see as a result of I guess religion gone bad, and then science at this on the other end, it's just I guess super objective view of reality that is presented to us by people who have zero biases and have gotten to this place and maybe have not basically don't have any conflict or don't have any like I guess conflict with their measurements or with the experimentation or whatever it may be. Is that what kind of what we're presenting here?
Well, there's good things about religion. Religion creates a sense of community. It does bring people together, right? People that are religious are less stressed and depressed, and they can shown to live longer, right? So there are some positive benefits to that. Science has negative elements in the sense that sociologists would argue science is used by those in power to point at what is real because they're the ones in control of the narrative. And all of this, the data determined by science is made up by those that are in power. And it's used as a point to oppress people. Yeah.
I think an answer to that as well, like another perspective on that is, I think major difference would be when it comes to religion and other beliefs, it starts from a point of wanting to believe, right? It's like falling in love, where initially there's the attraction between the people and everything else that comes afterwards is adding on to that. But if the baseline attraction is not there, then everything else you're building a tower on air, right? It's going to collapse. So that's the same thing with religion. There needs to be the desire to believe to begin with. Whereas with science, it's the desire to doubt. So everything you inherently have to doubt it inside. I think that's a
good distinction. Yeah. What do you think, Yusuf?
I mean, the whole wanting to believe that. I mean, that can kind of I think it could be argued against in a few ways. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's this whole wanting to believe. Maybe it's you kind of want to believe in a lot of things that, like we're talking about in the case of what constitutes reality for one person. It's difficult to sit and as a kind of person who is not this experiencer and say this guy wants to, let's just say, imagine the world in a particular way. Or when you were mentioning the example of schizophrenia,
sure.
It's difficult to look and kind of point figure, hey, this guy kind of wants to believe in that way or another, and rather not just that this is kind of reality, and even though that's kind of not real for you, it's still real for them.
Mm-hmm. So I think what is real is important for us to figure out.
Yeah.
Right. And there's our perception of our experience, and then there's our beliefs. Right. So perception and belief are fundamentally two different things. Belief, I'm going to put in that semantic category, that it's about language, because I perceive things like physical objects through my senses. You know what I mean? Like my eyes are taking in data and I perceive green, right? When it comes to psychosis, so on the other hand, we have psychosis, which is that whole reality/non-reality thing. And then we have delusion, which is like you believe things that are false. Like when you're made aware that it's false, it's like a form of arrogance. You have like this like attachment to the thing. You're like, I can't give it up. When someone is psychotic in that way, or they're suffering from psychosis, it's because it's in their experience. Like it's like the ice cream machine that is not there. But if I believed it was there, it would be because like there's something going on in my experience, that information is occurring to me that is indicating that there is this object there that I can interact with to some degree. Like there's some pretty interesting films about schizophrenia. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a detective. That's Shutter Island.
Was it, is that the one?
He thinks he's a detective and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
Scary movie.
Yeah.
It looked scary at least.
Yeah. And then he goes through this whole thing, and at the end, it was all in his head, and he realizes, and he's like, okay, you guys can like give me the lobotomy or whatever. Like he like accepts it in the end. And it was like a tragedy. Like, sorry to ruin the film. Oh, sorry, spoiler alert. Don't fucking watch the movie.
After already spoiling.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So, okay. So the thing with the psychosis thing is, so how do we can talk about how do we explain psychosis, right? And the information can't be coming from the external world, actually, because there's nothing there. And so the testing of how do you determine what is real and what is not, right? It can't necessarily be what I am experiencing or perceiving because of the existence of the psychosis thing, right? Or just optical illusions. You know, like if I could fly or had a jetpack, right? And then I saw like a rainbow and I was like, I want some blue. And I was like, I'm just going to fly over there and grab it, you know? It's not really going to work out for you. You know what I mean? Like, or I'm going to go grab a cloud. It's not going to work that well. You know, even though it looks like an object that I may be able to grasp, it's not.
Your perception tricks you.
Yeah, right? And that's just the nature of being human in some ways in this cosmos. If we have some like simulation thing that we can plug into with Neuralink or whatever, like the matrix of the next 100 years, right? Whatever that is. They could write it in such a way that you can like eat a cloud like it was ice cream, whatever. You know, that's the thing. But in this reality, in this orientation of our experience, it's not the case. So we talked about, you brought up desire here. And this desire has to come from somewhere. This motivation towards these beliefs, which may be correct or not, right? And that's why I talk about indoctrination, is it's a social phenomena. It's the group. There's certain biases that are actually being engaged that directs people towards accepting something that may or may not exist. And for certain religious groups, there are serious consequences if you don't agree, right? Even in the workplace, right? If like the classic case of groupthink was the Challenger spaceship, right? There were individuals that said, hey, we have a report, the engineer said that there's something wrong with the O-rings or whatever, and we need to check it. But there was like a deadline, and they were pressured to not bring up the criticism, and then the thing blew up. These are biases. Okay. Yeah.
Well, so like you're talking about, I guess maybe you're talking about how maybe science can help us agree, maybe as a group, as to what is real. That's what you're basically.
Science is a measuring tool. For us to figure out what is real, what I'm saying is that we need something, what I'm going to call it the philosophy society. Being philosophical is the meta, higher ordered approach to reasoning about anything, even if it's religion. And that I appeal to set theory, is that I can't use information inside of the set to understand the set. I have to use information outside of the set to understand the set. And so the thing that's always one step outside, we'll just call it philosophy. It's our capacity to reason and make sense of things, including our experience. And that's where, like, being philosophical, again, some people disagree with me. They're like, no, philosophy is only this, right? And you can only call yourself a philosopher once you have a PhD and you have added to this list. And we will be the judge of of that, not you. Whereas I'm saying there is a practice that is similar to religion as a social group, but it removes these properties of dogma and doctrination. Instead, what it does is it teaches the lessons we learn in the history of philosophy, which would be like critical thinking, right, and reasoning, but also the way that we are together. Like, what does it mean for us to be in relation to each other in the most wisest way possible? Which means that we've taken all the information we know about how people relate, and then we're a bit stronger because we're aware of it. Like if I know I have there's just the same with the shoelace thing. If I know that I can fall as soon as I see it, like I double tie my shoes. I'm literally showing you. Look, I double tie these things. Why? Because they always come undone. I will admit I suck at tying shoes. I can't just do one. So for like 7 years, I just double tie. And it works, right? I don't care. It works. And then I'm not kicking around with my shoelaces inside. So what does it mean to double tie the social group? You know, we go back to this, okay? So in the philosophy of science, okay, I'm losing this marker. One property to evaluate a theory. I'm giving you guys the theory here. Maybe you're right, maybe you're not. So how do we evaluate it? What is the way to go outside of what Achilles is saying to evaluate whether it has merit so that you can decide for yourself? And then you can use that same evaluation mechanism to determine other things, right? Thomas Kuhn, this goes back to our wizard tower. We got our Kuhn buddy here. He says one property is scope. Scope is how much fits inside the circle. What does the theory cover? Right? And so I'm making the claim that this theory, some kind of a group that focuses on certain skills and tries to counter these biases, will not only help with mental health, but it will also help with the way our society is structured from a governmental level. Right? Like there's currently kind of an uprising in Russia right now because of the recent election, and there's certain internal factions that are going against Putin, right? Because of just what's going on in that situation. And how do we evaluate whether that's a good or a bad thing? You know? And if there is, like, being imprisoned for like if you disagree with me, and let's say like people came in and they just dragged you away, is that good? No, it's fucking terrible, right? Anywhere in the world, if someone disagrees with you, like being thrown in a stack of tires and burned alive, right?
It's the death of reason.
Is the death of humanity. One of the things that makes us so distinct is our prefrontal cortex, our capacity for rational thought. And even if I explain it in terms of God, if God gave you the ability to reason, then it's your duty to God to use your reason to understand God. I'm not religious, I'm an atheist, but you could explain it that way too, right? There's certain philosophers that have talked about it that way. Averroes was an Islamic philosopher. Pretty sure it was him as well. So scope is one thing. Another one is predictability. Right? For your theory to have some merit, you need to make predictions that actually come true. Right? And it can't be just like, you know, after the fact. Like, oh, see, look, it worked out. You know what I mean? That's why Einstein, he made a very specific prediction. And then once they measured how the light came from like another system, and then it bent around the sun or something like that. And then his theory outperformed Newton's theory. And there was no way that because gravity bends light, there was no way he could have been correct other than his thesis, his calculations were right. Right? And it was very specific. And so that meant that his theory was better than Newton's theory. Right? Another one is falsifiability. So to falsify something, this comes from Karl Popper. He's in our Wizard's Tower too. Right? And this guy said, hey, you can't just go out there and try to confirm whether your theory is true or not. You actually need to try to prove it wrong. Because you can just ignore information that proves it wrong. You can say, oh, no, right? Confirmation bias. I'm just going to not pay attention to these things. or you can write your theory in such a way that it can never be tested. Falsifying, another way to say is you can test the theory, right? And so my prediction would be that if we structure a social group that has the positive benefits that we've observed in religion, even though it's not based in data that we can measure, right? And it doesn't have these drawbacks of indoctrination or violence or whatever, then we can deal with problems of mental illness and issues in our society at a governmental level.
Like, I think I'm a little skeptical about applying this I guess, this set of philosophy of science, I guess, reasoning or whatever, to the spectrum I think that you have up here with the on one hand this mental health and on the other hand this dictatorship. Like, I think, you know, from what I believe, at least from what we've seen, there's all these kind of, you know, interesting things about philosophy of science, you know, predictability, possibility, but replicability or whatever. They work pretty well when we're maybe trying to look at a lot of physical sciences or hard sciences, they call it, whatever. But not so much when we try to make science out of whatever psychology, sociology, or whatever, where we're really trying to heavily rely on statistics. And statistics really don't really have a voice of their own. They run numbers don't have like morality, essentially. And it's never like I don't really see a point in time where even like at you know, people had some kind of authority over technology and we're like, okay, this is now, you know, we're using this new scientific reasoning or whatever to basically segregate this group. Or basically, I guess basically maybe what Hitler even said, he said basically, you know, this is based on, you know, Darwinian term or whatever, evolutionary speaking. Now German, I guess that we have this master race and we have other Jewish race, of course, that kind of came into the whole other political agenda. But you still have this, every time you try to apply this philosophy of science to get some, to kind of extract out meaningful social rules, you end up with something miserable. So how can one kind of avoid that?
Yeah, so okay, so we're also going to put on this morality and ethics. Okay. And part of what we're doing is we're taking the biases we see in human nature and we're going to structure the group in such a way that it pushes back against those. First, by making them explicit, saying this is a thing, right? People have a tendency to, you know, always look at themselves in a better light. So I'm going to start with like, something I just hammered down on is narcissism. I am relentless against narcissism. And so we'll put this over here. And the bias is the self-serving bias. We have lost the blue marker. And so narcissism is like a way that an individual perceives himself, and they have a certain narrative, right? And then if in something in their experience or what other people say or perceive goes against that narrative, it would contradict, right? And so and we get something called dissonance, cognitive dissonance. And so how do I deal with that dissonance? That like uncomfortable feeling like, I think I'm amazing and you're telling me I suck. It's like, right? And so the narcissist, when we look at the DSM, they'll be like, they get aggressive and angry, right? They don't take time to understand the perspective of the other, i.e. empathy, so that they increase their awareness. They actually kind of just stay in their tunnel vision of their own sense of self, and they disregard this contradictory information to whatever they perceive. So what we would do is, this is one of the hardest ones because narcissism is a condition that adamantly is resistant towards forms of therapy like CBT, right? And I have worked with people that are narcissistic in my housing program. I have like a house that I have and people live with me and stuff like that. And, you know, it is very challenging. And the way I explain it is through my self-model theory. So there's this guy, you know, dude from Germany, he's not a Nazi. And his name is Thomas Meitzinger, and he's like a cognitive scientist. And he has this book called Being No One. And it's basically the model that there is no self. There is no static self. Like me as a being is just always constant as a variable. Like, you know, Or this is the difference between a constant and a variable. It's more variable, our sense of self. And he goes through these like models of how our first person experience is structured, right? And the self model is almost something akin to your personality. It's the way you relate to others and yourself in some ways over a variety of situations and states, right? And so people have different personalities. And so my theory is that if we have a social group and the narcissist is here, okay, we have certain rules we play the group by. And the narcissist kind of tries to break the rules so that it always has a sense of support for themselves, right? And so what I have found works sometimes, it's difficult because if it's only me doing it, then they will perceive me as like a negative thing and just not talk to me. And then they will go to somebody else that will allow them to do whatever they want to do or just unaware of it. And then that'll just embolden or enable their existing way of being, right? But if everybody, so like, look at it this way, if you're playing a game like soccer and only one person knows the rules, it's pretty hard to play the game, right? And if there was a bunch of people watching, and like, let's say the narcissist doesn't really know them, but has learned to play their own way, and then they win anyways, right? Because they'll just grab the ball and not show anybody and then just put it in the net. They're like, oh, I won, you know? What we need to do is teach everybody the rules. And so that's where being empirical, right, which is just to say like evidence-based, or one of the principles we would follow to be philosophical is proportion our belief to the evidence. It's unwise to believe in something like you get a phone call and it's like, oh, you got an interview next week. And you're like, I got the job. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, don't build up your expectations that far just yet. You have an interview, right? Or I'm going to get paid next week. Well, no, you haven't been hired yet. You just have the interview right now, right? And so when there's other, like I've talked about this at length, but this is just for today. There's other rules we can talk about. And when everybody has these rules, some form of structure, right? And what they will do is they will socialize. So there's indoctrination and then there's like socialization, which happens from when we're really, really young, but it continues to happen as we get older, which is like the reinforcement of certain norms and behaviors within a group. Like it is appropriate to behave this way, you know? Like if you go to some like person's like, I don't know, like if you went to like a nudist friend's house, I don't really do that ever, right? Or if you went to like a sex club, I don't really do that ever. And so if I went there, there would be certain ways of being that I would be like, this is weird for me. I'm not used to this, you know? But that's how they do things there, right? Or just simple like culture shock. You know, you go to a new place, you live there for 6 months, things are going to be different for you, right? So you're going to be re-socializing yourself as an adult, which kind of sucks. Because when you're a kid, you just deal with the suffering of people like telling you, no, you're not allowed to do that. You're like, oh, and they just say, oh, it's just because you're a kid. But as an adult, you're just used to getting away with things because you know how things are. But if you shift, it's tough for us. And there's also a different degree of neuroplasticity as a kid. We have a lot of neural connections that get pruned out after a while. So your criticism was, how can it be that one theory can apply to both of these things? It's because the same issues on either side are the same skills that people are lacking for themselves. They are having someone impose those skills because they're just uneducated or they haven't learned. And so my hypothesis would be that if we taught everybody these skills in some kind of a group format, this is actually why I'm doing this. I believe that not only would it increase mental health, which is different than like a neurological condition. If you get brain damage, or if you have like bipolar disorder, which is like a neurological thing, or if you're a psychopath, like your brain is just different, there may be some serious limitations, but even so, it would be still good to have this system in place, I think, because it's making us aware of things, and then we're going to learn certain skills that would be like the response to these things. And some of those skills are what I listed here, right? Okay, I'm just gonna like stop. Okay, how far did I get?
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, keep going, whatever.
Okay.
Start your word, yeah.
I just want to make sure, because like sometimes they get lost.
Yeah, no, it's great, yeah.
Okay, good. So the narcissist is a problem for sure, and they don't mean for it to be. It's just like if you think of humans as fish, we all swim in our own way, right? And some may just swim by bumping into other people, and the other people are like, "Hey, man, don't fucking bump into me. It's like not cool, you know." And so they're like, "I've always done it that way." And so, who are you to tell me not to, right? Like, what is real? What are you doing to me? You know what I mean? That's not cool. And so, like, when we look at like different situations over time, you know, like there's like different patterns that you can have. And so, like, at each junction, there's like things you can say, whether or not the behavior is rewarded, or like, this is like the pattern of socialization almost. And part of what the work of the philosophy society, or whatever you want to call it, is how do we respond in these circumstances? And that's where it's just beyond me. It's like us, like we have to do that as a society. And we do it already. Like we have the criminal justice system, we have these institutions, and we're just dealing with ourselves. We're like, okay, you know, we die and we get sick. And so we have a medical institution. Like Canada is recently implementing this dental plan for everybody, right? So those are like real human problems. But if you were AI, they'd be like antivirus care, you know, I'd be, okay, right? Like it'd be different because you're a different being. Or if like the aliens came down and they're like, we have this weird gas problem where our eyes like will explode. This is something weird, you know, because it's not human. You know what I mean? We can't be on, your atmosphere is bad for us, like whatever. You'd have these helmets, we need to have like helmet repair stations everywhere. Okay, are you paying for it? Yes. Okay, then do it. Right? So the real situations that occur, and really what you want to do is you want to teach people, you want to try to forecast what they're going to be facing, right? And then what skills do they need to have to deal with them? Right? So like for depression, for example, like the fundamental approach with depression is that, at least for CPT, is that, and these guys know this online, but like we've heard this before, is there's distorted thinking, right? The way I'm thinking about the world is not correct. It's kind of a critical thinking fallacy, but it's a specific type that makes me feel bad, you know, or angry, or not willing to socialize, or I don't act, I procrastinate. And so last year, or almost 2 years ago now, I taught this book called Feeling Good. And my reasoning for doing that was because a lot of our, going back to the well-being thing, a lot of our suffering comes from like misplaced emotions, right? So if I'm like, I want everyone to be well and be good, if we can just deal with the emotion part right away, that's the best for you, right? Because now you feel good. And not only do you just feel good, it's like, now you feel good, like a pill, right? Like literally, that's what people do, eat pills. We've taught you how to do it. And David Burns, he's like, you can take the medication, and there's some evidence to show that it has some effect, or you can learn this skill. And when you compare the two, they're almost equivalent. But the difference is that there's a whole bunch of side effects with this medication, right? And you're dependent, on an external substance for your life to be okay. And one of the other things too, on the depression point, is like if you feel like shit, maybe that's your being telling you that there's something wrong and you need to do something about it, right? It's not that like there's something wrong with you because you have feelings. No, your feelings are there as an instrumental purpose to help guide you, right? So that's like an assumption I'm making.
It's like physical pain.
Sorry?
It's like a physical
Yeah.
pain that signals something's wrong.
Exactly, right? Like don't touch the hot element. Don't just be like, there's something wrong with my hand, it's burning. It's like, that's confused, right? So with the depression thing, one of the things on here is like the philosophy of CBT, and I've written some stuff, you guys can check it out, or we can talk about it. And it's really just a form of critical thinking. But when you learn it yourself, and like the two people online, they're like my two best students, I've taught them this at length. I can't wait, right? But they're happy because it's good for them and it's improved their lives. And me teaching them, when I say or do something stupid, they're like, Achilles, are you being distorted in your thinking? And for me to demonstrate like my mastery of myself is not to disagree with them, not to be the narcissist, but to say, thank you. Thank you for reminding me, because I'm human and I forget. And that's part of the reason why I teach you, because there's going to be a day when I'm just like, ugh, ugh. And then you're going to be like, Achilles. And I'll be like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Well, that's the purpose of the group, kind of creating an echo chamber where good advice or good life practices can circulate around the group, and the group can self-correct for where the individual might lag.
Very good. 100%. Right? Because you can't do it alone. And the mental health, your mental health will necessarily go up. And part of our duty is to learn those things. And then when we talk about like a government or a society in general, it's like, we'll assume democracy, right? Yeah, meritocracy is best. That like it's not just every vote counts, because then you have like charismatic leaders on a whole variety of different types, or people that like push power and coerce others, like the dictator, that will just get votes illegitimately almost, like Donald Trump. Is it really, do you guys really understand what's going on? Or are you just doing it because he made you laugh? It's like, oh, that was cool. I got to see Trump be an asshole again. That was fun. I'm going to vote for him. At least it's fun for me. That's not the role of the president of like one of the largest powers in the world. Like should be a little boring, It shouldn't just be funny. Oh, look at nuclear weapons. Ha 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 ha. That's not, no, that's inappropriate. Like someone driving. Let's just pick the drunk guy because he's the funniest guy. No, that's not correct. We want the person that's the most responsible, that is going to make us safe and allow us to grow as a people. Right? That makes sense. Like, get us home safe, Uber driver. That's what we want from you. So what is necessary for us to make that happen? And so what I've done, the reason the scope is so broad is because human nature is relatively still limited to these two fundamental axioms. We're conscious and we're like networked together as this social being. And we can see it in the biases. There's individual biases, like I get confused about things, whether I'm alone or with other people. And then I get confused when I'm with people. The presence of others just makes me, it can confuse us. And so that all kind of goes back to the what is real thing, right? And not only what is real, like what are we going to do about it? That has to do with values, okay? I did not know what I was going to talk about today, by the way. I never do. I was going to talk about home, but we're doing this instead because you guys are here. So yeah, I have no slides. Okay, so our values, right? They come from, again, how we're socialized. Okay, and I think I went into values a few months ago. And so you can like value something like instrumentally, like I use it for this purpose, right? And then there can be values that are like intrinsic. This is the kind of person that I am, or something that like I want to live for, like a goal or a purpose, right? And so there's going to be like individual values, like this person has this thing. Then there's going to be like collective values. We all value this thing. Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question to you. Where do you draw your values from?
Yeah, I mean, that's
From the group, or from your own curiosity, or from your desire, or from the desire of a group or somebody you love?
yeah, I guess that's a difficult question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't think I'm not even sure if there's like a single right answer. I think probably like the normal person, the regular person, they have to derive the value at least to some degree socially. Like if there's it's very hard to believe something is real alone. And it seems like, I mean, whatever that may be, like in whatever culture you go to, if you would visit a completely ancient tribe, or maybe a tribe that's detached from the modern world, and you go and ask them, I guess, yeah, that question, yeah, you kind of get a similar answer. Yeah, but I guess it's a tough question. I'm not sure. What would you say to that as well? Yeah, how would you answer that?
Me personally,
Yes.
like not valuing anything at all. I think that's a one position to take on it, because I feel like if you're quiet, you can hear all the noise around you. But if you're being loud, maybe sometimes too loud, you feel like you're in an empty space, right?
But there's a risk in that sometimes maybe you could be viewed as a bystander, as someone who maybe is not taking affirmative like action to stop something that you know is in your hands to stop, that is bad. I guess it's because yeah, sometimes maybe life demands that you must take a stance and you must kind of choose a value that your enemy maybe on the other side objectively disagree with it, and you have to be like, okay, there's some level of truth in both sides, and there's no singular like side of the coin in terms of when it comes to, I guess, values and I guess yeah, it's with how other people define what real is for you, and how yeah, you can't really go outside of the tribe and just say something else is real. It doesn't matter. Like it almost doesn't seem to matter that like if one tribe says we can accomplish X task using Y magic, complete nonsense, and you go to another tribe, you're saying they can accomplish the same task using some other magic, complete nonsense. It doesn't matter what the truth is, but the truth is to either of these tribes. What matters is, I guess, the level of agreement and whatever the social truth of that statement is.
Okay. What do you value, sir?
Well, I'm going to respond to what you guys both talked about. So you are, Dachi?
Yeah.
Dachi. Going on the, you're going into Nietzsche territory a bit with the no value thing, which is it's a place, and there is value in that, right? There's something to be gained, and Nietzsche kind of goes that it's nihilism, right? That there are no values, and then by extension, we don't really believe in anything anyways, from that. And I talk about that recently in like a mode of acceptance. When things happen and we're faced with reality is different than what I thought it was, or if there's parts of me, like in the depressed person, that I just believe really bad things. I don't value myself, right? That's the depression part. It's like our self-esteem is low. So I may need to just get rid of all of it and be in a place of nothingness, which is better than being in negativity. I'm actually going up, right? From negative 100 to like 0. Like, whew, that's great, I think that being mindful, right, is like a practice where I can be aware of that which is going on around me. And that is a value in itself. And then I can use my like philosophy, my ability to think about these things and understand the meaning of them,
And I guess, yeah, with no value, probably like, I guess for one to really, maybe like the Nietzschean way or whatever, for one to really find out one's true own value, one like must deconstruct all the values that they know first, and then kind of rebuild it from the ground up. So like, yeah, maybe there's no path to I guess authentic values than first to kind of deconstruct or question all current value and your social values.
Yeah, there is no way like done to do, but I think that's also the way to like kind of philosophy, where when you're born, you're kind of introduced to the world in the form of facts. Everything will hit you like a fact. Initially, it's your parents, whatever your parents tell you is fact, right? And then as you start to understand the world more abstractly, you start to doubt your parents, their ideas, maybe your religion. After that, you start doubting more and more, and then reality becomes more fluid for you to manipulate.
That's good, yeah. I'll just say yes. In your position, so this is different models of truth, right? Like, what is truth, right? So truth, we can have coherence in some ways that whatever is everybody agrees on, that is what is true. And by extension, you could say that's what we ought to value, And then the other one we can say is like correspondence, that the truth is what is. Because the problem with the coherence theory, whether it's value or truth, is that we'll always be stagnant to the group. But the group itself had to have come to that value from somewhere. or that truth, right? And there would never be any advancement in our understanding of either values or truth if it was always just what everyone agrees on, right? So I do believe that somebody can have awareness or see something accurately, independent of using the measuring stick of science. They may know something. It's just that the science, that helps you with the justification. So you may have a true conclusion, like the thing you say is true. It's just that you didn't have the ability to prove it. And that's like, oh, no one believes me. Why? And that's where, like, if you're the leader, you go beyond the tribe. You know what I mean? Like, if you just know that there's like a forest fire coming in, everyone's like, no, it's the God of, of whatever. It's a good thing. You're like, it's not. It's bad. And it will kill us all. You know what I mean? There's a high chance there have been humans that have been able to lead the tribe out of that danger. Our ancestors, and we all lived because of it. As just like a thought experiment. And so there are ways that we can determine some values will be universal to all. Fundamentally, like, again, there's mental illness and some forms of like masochism may like want to be tortured, but that is not the norm. That's not the way that human beings have evolved, right? Or being bullied. People can like tell themselves that it's okay, it's supposed to be this way. They internalize it, but the brain doesn't function well in those environments. Your creativity and your sense of flow and your ability to function are all inhibited, right? Not good, So what we want like a harmonious growth for ourselves. That's like a value, almost for all humans. And we say, well, what does it mean to have that? How do you implement it? Like, what do you do? And that's this again. It's like, how is it structured? And that's, I think, worthy to talk about. Let's figure it out, right? And so part of it is the notion of habit. Like the way that our brains have evolved, habit can be a good thing or a bad thing, right? We can utilize the power of habit. There's like a book, The Power of Habit, for good. But whether we know it or not, we can develop habits that are not good for us, right? Like addictions, for example, or whatever, So habit's one of those things that goes down into like one of the properties of the individual. But then there's also like social habits too, which is like, I don't know, the socialization is kind of part of it, but something that we need to talk about is like emergent phenomena. That when you think about particles like a cloud, right? A cloud behavior is an emergent phenomena to water particles at that level of the atmosphere. Like millions of these particles together make something called a cloud, right? And so when we have one person, there are properties of the individual, and when we have a bunch of these persons, there's a group. And there are properties of the group that are reduced to properties of the individual. There's not a direct reduction. Reductionism, it could be like a logic, like a fallacy almost here, right? Like you're taking properties of the larger entity and saying it's the fallacy of division, saying that it's the same properties of the individual, and it's not 100% mapped on that way. And so this is where I wish I had the book, because we would go to the chapter where I talk about the self. But I've talked about it in this last year. It might be in the title of the videos. Whether you guys watch them is a different thing, but so properties of the self, that's like the very core of what's going on. You know what I mean? And because that's what you're dealing with, whether you're with the other people, because you need to be able to function on your own independently as like an entity, and you need to function in the context of the group. And so this is the same for you. It's just that when you're all together, now you have to be aware of those other biases. So we need to incorporate the response to these things in you when you're alone. You can't just like flip it on when you're with other people. You have to always have it in mind. It's one of the two axioms of being in some ways, right? That even when I am alone, I am kind of part of the group because they're in my head. Unless you're like a feral person who was like isolated from birth and you're going to be developmentally like stunted, right? Your ability to have language and utilize language is depreciated, amongst other things, right? So this is what I'm saying. And so the how we do it part is, that's where we have like a social organization. Another word for it is institution. And like, that's what a religion, like a school, those are institutions. I talk about like the medical system, right? This is another type of institution, but we want it to be a self-reflective institution that also doesn't have the problems of bureaucracy within them, right? Is it possible? I think so. I think there's a way. And yeah, so long story short, the reason that we're here is to talk about relevant parts of the history of philosophy. We can do that, you know? We'd have to do some readings, and getting people to read, even when you're in university, is a challenge. Like if you talk to the professors, they're like, no one reads. Like some people read, but not everybody. This is more about like a skill or a practice. And so the value we're agreeing on, what makes us a group, is that we agree that it is valuable for us to be aware of our human nature and to practice being better humans. That's just the most simple way I could say it, right? And there are objective measures of what that is. And you say, well, how do we know that? Well, that's where I come in. I just spent a lot of time taking classes, like over 140 undergraduate classes. I'm on like my 5th degree, right? Before I do my PhD. And yeah, and it doesn't have to be me. There could be other people that talk about things, but it's just that the goal is this wise group or philosophy society. That's the goal. And the implications would be mental health, like I said with the CPT thing, or how are we aware of how we're being governed? And what do we do if it's not good? Right? Because if we can't get along, eventually the environment will be a problem, like an asteroid or a meteor or climate change, right? It doesn't have to be Putin or Kim Jong-un, right? Or Xi Jinping. It doesn't have to be the dictators. It could just be the cosmos, right? And we can be fatalistic and be like, but God would never do that. Well, you know, there have been 5 mass extinctions on the planet. Did the dinosaurs deserve to die? Like, what if they believed in God and they worship just as good as us? They didn't, but you know, what if they did? That's not cool. Or our vegan friends who just make the argument that the lamb doesn't want to die. It has just as much of a right to live as you do. Like there are scriptures that say that's not the case, but I'm just discussing it from a pure position of sentience, right? Or a being that exists, you know?
So people have also been wiped out, I think, like almost wiped out.
Humans, yeah, a couple of times. Yeah, there's evidence of that too. So I think fundamentally, I just talked about this the other day with one of my friends. She like telling me she's suffering a lot and like really upset, you know? And I was just trying to help her calm down. And I was explaining to her that like the fact that you exist is like the first property, you know? And that is something to be happy about. And you can exist in suffering or you can exist in wellness.
This is something interesting I like to point out. Sometimes, some like philosophy is a sort of like, it's like sometimes akin to religion, right? Because it's not very empirical. It's full of verification is reason, right? Mm-hmm. But sometimes religion might get to where philosophy got to through reason, but religion might get there like through another route, right? Mm-hmm. For example, the same thing you said, you might be like, the very reason, you know, you being human is a reason to rejoice, right?
Yes.
That's something that is said in the Bible as well. Okay, and other religious scriptures, like you're human, right? You should be solely happy just for the reason that you're human. Mm-hmm. Of course, it also says terrible things like just because you're sexually a male, right? You should be happy. And also just because you're a Jew, Jewish, but still, like sometimes they reach the same point, but different routes.
Yeah, which is totally cool. That they've come to some truths, you know. That's the problem with I've talked about this extensively with religion stuff. If you guys ever get to some of the videos, I may bring it up there. Is that religion becomes the meta thing. Remember when I talked about philosophy is the higher order thing? If you put, this is what I talked about last time, if you have God here in your religious view, you need something to understand God. You can't actually take something out of the set that's a content and understand the content with content.
Well, what I feel like most people, when the, I guess, early definition of God anyways, is whatever it is that kind of exists outside of this countable set, or it's like you can divide the world in tiny little pieces, okay? And whatever it is that you kind of can divide, whatever kind of goes stretches, it kind of falls into the definition of God.
That's cool. If that's the case, then you have to erase this one.
God of the gaps.
And Immanuel Kant would agree with you. God is in the noumena, and we can never know God. So if that's the case, forget about it. Don't worry about it. Just keep on being you.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, kind of also like the also raises the fundamental flaw in the inability to use logic to argue about the existence of God. At least in my opinion, it's like you're trying to use logic to reach a point that, by definition, logic is not trying to reach, I guess.
Even language.
Yeah.
Right, and that would take out all scripture, and that's fine, right? Like for me. For some people, it's not because of this stuff, right? They're socialized, and there may be like social consequences to disagreeing with it. And I'll talk about how like there are people that don't believe, but because of the social group that they're in, they have to say that they believe. But if they were alone and no one would know, they'd be like, I don't really know what's going on here. You know, like they have that doubt, right? And so the fact that we're talking about this stuff is being philosophical, right? And I can say, I believe this, and I'll justify it. I'll use the true justified belief thing. I'll say, this is why I believe it, or not, right? And our ability to communicate about it is one of those properties, right? Communication. And one of our values is understanding. So I have the organizational mandate. I wrote like an organizational mandate, and it's on the website. So you guys can, I'll give you guys a card later, and then I'll just post it. Are you both in the chat group?
I think, yeah, I have.
Okay. I'll repost the organizational mandate. I've been rewriting the beginning. And if you guys are interested to go through it with me as I'm writing it, and we can do that, that's cool. There's another guy that I'm doing that with. I'll like read a couple sentences, and then he has to rewrite this, and I'll explain it. So he's kind of learning about philosophy as I write the mandate, which is cool. But this is what it is. This is what I mean by the Philosophy Society. And the reason we come here is because it's like, I used to do martial arts for a long time when I was right here at stage. And we trained at least once a week, sometimes 3 times a week, you know, just so it's in mind because of the habit thing, right? And so this kind of thing, I think we need to practice once a week in this context. And there's also other facets of what the philosophy study really would be. We would have workshops on specific kinds of habits. Like I have a business model for this, and there would be courses that you could take if you wanted, right? And you could be an instructor for one of them. You could be an instructor too, you know, and you would teach something. You would teach like the psychology of habit or mindfulness, right? You teach people the nothingness of value and to be present in their experience and to see what exists instead of imposing their existence on things.
Only if it's slightly above minimum wage.
Well, when we get there, yes, of course it will be. I'm just saying that like for this to make sense, it needs to also be an economic entity so that it's self-perpetuating, right? Not only is it like a belief system that I believe is coherent, that satisfies these properties. Simplicity and coherence are the last two. Simplicity means that it should not make assumptions. And there are some axioms, though, or the least amount of assumptions. And the coherent part is it's not internally contradictory. And so it's been at least 10 years since I've been making sure that it has those properties. Right. And we can talk about it. If there's a mistake, let me know. We'll fix it. So that's kind of what the purpose of the group is. And yeah, I just go through things, and it depends on who's here, right? Like I said, and part of it is like we're working together on it, and that's why I want you guys to talk and to talk to each other and to have like a thing going on.
You said it's Socratian, right?
Socratic.
And I like it because I watched a YouTube video on it where his method of teaching was he would just start by question. It's just a random place by starting asking questions, and then he would continue the conversation by continually questioning the beliefs of the person that
Yes.
makes a statement. And then that makes the conversation. It's just like until you completely doubt everything and you leave the house being like, who am I? Where am I? What am I? Right? So you leave there with questions, not with answers.
Well,
And
I'm
then-
not going that far.
Not that far?
I am giving us some answers here.
Yeah, we get.
I also like, I think there are some things we can know for sure.
Okay, okay.
I think we have to know some things, like with this simplified version of epistemological view of true justified belief. And there are some issues like the Gettier problem and some other like the GRU paradox. Like there are some specific things that if we were doing a class in epistemology, we could talk about that stuff. But for the purposes of the Philosophy Society and this, the practical element of well-being and eudaimonia, I think that this is the best. I think this works,
What is it that this works best for? Because most of the thing I heard from you is mental health, right?
Sure.
And so the focus of it is helping the members of the group improve their mental health,
Mhm.
or is it, as you said, more universal and people can get back to it to help them with other aspects of their life, other than maybe, I mean, mental health is connected to everything. So that's like a critical spot to hit.
Mhm.
But maybe let's say they want advice on maybe making decisions, right? And that's like
Yeah, that's
the
part of
domain of economics, but
it's part of it too, like well-being or living a good life eudaimonia. Like there's a multi-pronged entity of wellness. And mental health is like a contemporary like concept that we really talk about people with mental illness, And so the model is to prevent future mental illness from happening and then be corrective to existing mental illness, like a treatment to those things. I'm a mental health counselor, right? I'm a philosophical counselor. And so I give mental health counseling. But this is my approach to do it at a social level and just teach people the skills and have it being a self-perpetuating system that we just do it for each other automatically because of these properties that we would be reinforcing in ourselves. So there's a bunch of stuff on the website, like that I've written that explains a lot of things. Just depends if you want to read or not. Or you can just have me tell you. That's either way. And the other thing with the government stuff is about autonomy and having critical thinking. And so I'm going through the critical thinking as we talk about it, as an example. So when you criticize me and we talk about stuff, I'll identify fallacies. I think it's good to take a course in critical thinking just because, but we can practice it here and on different subjects, right? This is like an introductory day for us,
okay.
right?
What is something that a long-standing belief that like at some point you've come to doubt and maybe revert? And like what would be the cause of that?
So I can maybe repeat that question one more.
Yeah, I know it came out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's-
It's like, what is a belief you had, an existing belief that you like just abandoned because of, and what was like the provocation that brought you to bring that belief into question?
That's I guess. Yeah, I guess like maybe I'm quick to admit I'm wrong. So in life, I think I back up on my beliefs all the time. But I think the most significant one was probably I think like a lot of I guess people, a lot of kids kind of experience this thing where maybe they grew up in a culture, a very religious culture like I did, and then maybe they kind of transitioned out of that and they had to rebuild their belief system because all of a sudden their kind of understanding of the world through the lens of religion and culture has been like completely shattered by incoming information, let's just say from academic sources or university, like my case, university, or like learning. And then kind of try to rebuild a comprehensive view of the world that answers for tries at least why, like, why am I here? Why there's so much suffering? All this kind of stuff that was so easy to come to you when you were a kid and you kind of had this religious foundation to fall back on,
So it would be religion for you.
I was born Christian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh no, you transitioned to another religion, or you?
I'm not like a practicing religious. I guess I wouldn't say that.
Oh.
I'm like spiritual. I have some views, like some new views on religion. But I wouldn't say like God exists like outside.
Oh, okay. Wow. It's so terrible to make assumptions because I assumed you were religious, right?
Me?
Was it just me? No, I assumed he was
Yeah, yeah,
religious, right? Was it just me? You gave that, aura of a religious person, I think. So I made that assumption. That's interesting. That's interesting.
Well,
Well,
I
I
mean,
belief
like-
you had that now you're abandoning.
Now I'm abandoning. Yeah.
So for yourself, what's the belief that you had that you let go, and why you let it go?
Belief? Oh man, it was so hard. It's so hard to think of a belief I let go because I mostly it's been since a young age that I decided to opt out of all belief, just so that I can gain understanding. Mostly because like I come from a multi cultural family, right? A multi religious family as well.
Mhm.
So like early on, I just decided that okay, I come here for facts and then I go somewhere else and there's like a completely different set of facts. And like there's no reason, there's no way I can compete these two and then be like, okay, this one is more right than the other,
Mhm.
right? So like I abandoned religion when I was like super young,
Mhm.
like super young.
I was like that too.
Huh?
I was like that too.
Yeah, and then I transitioned to Islam just because, no
Okay.
reason. I just wanted to get inside and understand, so I went to masjid and stuff. And then not like I started believing. It's not like as I said, I built a castle on air in midair,
Mhm.
right? Just so that I can have the experience to speak of.
Mhm.
And then I just transitioned out again.
So you're still there, or are you in a different place?
I'm nowhere. I believe there's nothing I value concretely. For example, if you'd ask me to do a tattoo, I have so many opportunities to make a tattoo on myself, or to buy something that I will hold on to for a long time. But then there's nothing I value so much that I would have like permanently, on my skin, or I'll have permanently as an object I hold on to.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing, right?
Do you think there are any moral, I guess call it moral, whatever, moral principles that for you are like undoubtable, like unshakable, like these are facts and I cannot.
No, there's like it starts from a simple understanding that like the way I think about the world, like it's like I have my own way of thinking about it. Like the decision is like I'm going to completely opt out of everything, and then I'm going to like take whatever best piece of information I can, either from an observation, from a reading or whatever, or from an assumption, and then I'm going to include that. So it starts from, I classify it in 2 dimensions, right? In the first dimension, there is a state where nothing exists in the way we can perceive it, right? It's unperceivable, ununderstandable. So it's not the oneness of the universe, because one is a human conception, right? One is a human conception. There is no oneness, there is no two-ness, three-ness, like everything is indistinguishable, right? And then there's the second dimension where there's you, like the inner self, and then the external universe, right? External world, inner world. And then further in, I classify them into souls, right? So based on that, like the further you go and the further you get, you kind of take into context the environment you're in, then more and more values start to creep in. And then based on that, I can make a judgment on what is right and wrong. But inherently at the back of my mind, I know that ultimately in reality, there is no such thing as right and wrong. But based on context, there is. So if you were, or like, if I saw somebody like murdering somebody, I would obviously think it's wrong and I would try to stop it or something like that, right? But if you were later on to come and ask me, do you have any deep-seated hatred for the person that committed the murder? I would say no, I don't have a deep-seated hatred to that person, right?
Well, if you watched it happen, maybe you would.
I mean, I did see it. I've seen accidents before me. I've seen I come from Africa, like poor parts of Africa, Ethiopia,
Mhm.
and a poorer region in that as well, right?
Mhm.
So I've seen some things happen there as well. So deep inside, I have a neutrality of where I don't decide whether a person is inherently evil or a good person, but their actions I can interpret in the scenario as being bad or good.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel that like, if someone hurt somebody you care about, do you think that you would still not have any negative disposition towards the attacker or the person who's bad or did the bad act?
I would have, but like my understanding of like because I made I make a distinction. Okay, like let me tell you the terms. There's this soul I call it the inanima, right? The inanima is my translation of my inner physical activity. So whenever there's disappointment and anger, I know that's because of internal like mechanisms that are forcing me to feel that, right?
Mhm.
Because if I don't feel scared when I see something terrible happen, I wouldn't be a very good species and I wouldn't survive. Humanity wouldn't survive,
Okay,
right?
Sure.
If I don't feel fear, if I don't feel anger, couldn't be part of a community if I don't feel empathy, right? So inherently, I understand that is a result of internal mechanisms, right?
Okay.
So when I make a judgment of the person, I won't conceptualize it as a universal rule that that person is evil for killing my relative.
Mhm.
I'll conceptualize it that this is a system that's going on within me that's making me feel this way and that wants me to act in a certain way.
Mhm.
But then depending on the situation, either I will act on it based on my internal being,
Yeah.
or I will not act on it, right? So if that person is super evil and maybe if I'm in a context where I can take revenge, right? I might. But if I'm in a context where I'm in Canada, like a very secure country, and if I take revenge on the killer of my mother, for example, then there will be consequences towards me, right? They say you should have called the police, you shouldn't have beaten up the killer, right?
Mhm.
Then I wouldn't do it,
Mhm.
right? I'll do it another way.
Mhm.
So it's like a neutral position. Like I like to have a neutral position when it comes to myself, even.
Yeah, I see the mindfulness, like the not being attached. It's Buddhist in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, kind of.
Interesting. What do you think?
Yes, I mean, yeah, like I could see why you're kind of asking the initial question, kind of pushing to see if there was something like terrible would happen in your immediate circle, in like your personal space. Would that not induce naturally shock? And I mean, that was kind of and yeah, I guess yeah,
Not that it's something you want to test. You don't want to be like,
yeah,
"Let's
it's something
see
you
how-
absolutely don't want to. Yeah,
Let's see how I feel when this happens."
I
Like,
hope that never happens.
That's
to you, of
terrible.
course, yeah.
Unethical science.
yeah.
I said it, yeah.
Okay, so that's good for today. Come back next week, same time, same room. You can meet me downstairs, and then I just come up here, or you can just be in this room. I think it's the same room. Natalia, our administrative assistant, she books the rooms, and
I'd be interested in like, of course, like, yeah, I appreciate that this was kind of like an overview and an introduction. Yeah, but I'd be interested in kind of maybe a slightly more structured, at least. Well, I guess, yeah, it probably depends because maybe there's some people new or whatever, they need kind of maybe want to talk over the overview again, but yeah, maybe like a certain, like an agenda to kind of go through.
I usually don't do
Maybe
that with
probably
these.
hard, yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry.
wondering, yeah.
Sometimes when we go through a book, so we're gonna go, it'll be more structured in that sense. Because we'll be going through the book. So the next book, if you guys want to get it, is Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And so if you don't get the book, you can just share with somebody while we're here, but it'll be like you won't be able to really read it unless you have a copy in advance. You can get it for like $10 at BMV used. It's an old book, but it's a good book. And so it'll be a bit more structured in that sense. I actually will have slides for that.
But I
And-
still like enjoy the kind of the broad kind of jump, like, kind of expanding. It's kind of brings in a lot of, different points and a lot of different aspects. So
Yeah, it's not like a standard lecture in that sense. Like I'm kind of like, I'm being more Socratic in that way. And I'm kind of expanding the meaning of things or unpacking the meaning and then trying to connect everything together. That's why it's more of like a thought experiment, and a dialogue with the people that are here. And it's a challenge for me, I think this is me being philosophical or the act of philosophy more so than just going through slides and just reading them to people verbatim. I've been told that this is very difficult to do, because if you just have slides, you just read it and you're just like, what do
yeah,
you?
no, I don't think slide is the right now, but I guess maybe like somewhere in between somehow,
Yeah, I never know.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying, and people said it to me before, but I kind of just wing it like in that sense
Yeah.
for whatever reason. just because I don't want to in advance determine what I'm going to say. I want to discover something, and I want to challenge myself a little bit and see what I come to. Maybe I'll make a realization or a discovery in this method because I don't know what I'm going to say. Like obviously everything I've said before. I'm just saying it a little bit differently for you guys because you guys are here. Like what was new for me? There was something that was kind of new. I don't know. I forget. Doesn't really matter. This is a little bit new. It's like it's very basic right now, but it'll become more complicated over time. Just trying to map out how we act over situations and how do we define, like what distinguishes one situation from the other? What are the properties of situations? And then how could we have some like algorithm to apply to those situations so that you could practice in advance and utilize it? Similar in a way that like, we have the periodic table of elements and there are properties of each element. And then we can understand those elements in like physical and chemical changes, right? Which is based on physics, like the atoms and then nuclei and electrons of each element, right? So what would be the elements of the self and how does the self function within like a situation, which is like a chemical reaction or a physical change, that would be very useful when it comes to like predictability. That would be like insanely, if you could do it, very, very good, because it would make this stuff more objective in some ways. And so part of my theory or my trajectory is that the way that we define constructs, like psychological constructs, the way that we like draw the circle around the thing, that's the problem. Is that maybe there's actually a couple phenomena like out here and the circle should be like this. We just don't know because we can't see it. Science fundamentally is based on observation. You have to see something first, develop a theory, and then test the theory. But if you don't see it correctly, then how do you know what is there?
I guess, yeah, unless it was like a leap of imagination, like Einstein, for example. He kind of, he didn't work from experiments backward. He didn't work from experiment to theory, kind of laid out a theory first based on like thought experiments and imagination and intuition. And then they kind of ended up proving, oh, yeah, this guy was right. Oh, look at that. Like the light is bending or whatever, all the stuff, like you said, that kind of came like even later.
Mm.
So